Hi, we're at the 11th Conference on Future Energy, and the reason I ask you to turn to page 9 is I spent a lot of time assembling color images of Paul's greatest achievements in terms of literary recordings of subquantum kinetics, the decoding pulsars, Earth Under Fire, Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion, the bestseller, I think, so far. And so, president of the Starburst Foundation since 1984, conducting interdisciplinary research in physics, astronomy, geology, geochemistry, paleoclimatology, systems theory, and cognitive psychology. He's an eclectic American general systems theorist, astrophysicist known, among other things, for development of galactic superwave theory, besides subquantum kinetics that's already been cited by other presenter, a physicist, and given the credit for including the electrodynamics that we should be using instead of Maxwell's. And so far, 14 predictions have been confirmed by him for the superwave theory, and 12 have been confirmed for subquantum kinetics. So that's a very nice achievement for putting out a theory that you may or may not see the connection to the real world. And his bachelor's in physics was from Johns Hopkins, his master's in business administration, and a PhD in systems theory from Portland State. And as I say, the books that he's produced are numerous, and some of them, I think all of them, are available here at the conference. And the patents he holds are on novel breathing bag system, closed circuit breathing apparatus, and he speaks at universities and symposia around the world. And speaking on the topic of testing the superluminal and time dilation predictions of the subquantum kinetics unified field theory, please welcome Dr. Paul LaViolette. That's for the recording.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Tom. These are my two websites that you see here. So today I want to start off with talking about some Coulomb wave experiments I did in 2005 and 2006 with Guy Obolensky, and they're written up in Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion in one of the chapters. This Guy Obolensky, he died recently last year, unfortunately, a real genius. How many here know of Guy Obolensky? He was taking apart and putting together diathermy machines at the age of 5 or 6. He's an incredible guy. Never went to university, but self-taught. Was way ahead of a lot of people. So he was board member on the Starburst Foundation board from 2004 to the time he passed away. And this is our website. It came up in, I guess, a board meeting to repeat some of his experiments on superluminal wave propagation. He had published a few papers on having observed superluminal propagation, but he had now gotten a new oscilloscope, much faster, and wanted to do a more detailed analysis. So we went to his laboratory down in Sloatsburg, where he has his natural energy therapy device, which it was basically a negative ion wind, ether wind generator. And so people would get healed in front of this. They'd stand on a glass platform, and this would radiate sort of like electric shock waves. He was inspired by Tesla's technology in this area. Besides the magnifying transmitter, which Tesla developed, which was basically high-frequency AC, he also worked with sort of sudden discharges, very sharp, short rise time electric shock fronts. Guy developed it into this apparatus, 200,000 volt potential shocks that would come out from this. And I used it several times myself. So we were set up in his laboratory. This is sort of a diagram of his laboratory. It was in the basement. And you see here, here's the basement ceiling, and here he had his oscilloscope in the upper story. And this was his ether wind device. He used a Cockcroft-Walton generator get the voltage up to around 200,000 volts or so, and would discharge to the dome through what he called the Teslatron, which was a kind of multi-fin spark gap, which shaped the wave, helped shape the wave to be a very sharp rise time wave. And it would create shocks that would travel across his laboratory. And he had drilled holes in the ceiling here so he could stick these coaxial cables down. They're basically antennas. They were bare on the tips. One was connected to the ground here, and the other he could put at different distances from the dome. And here they're marked out, the distances. So knowing the distances and the time lapse between the signal from here to when it gets here, we could determine the speed of the wave. And this gives you an idea of the height of somebody standing down there. All this was metal walls, shielded. And this is the results we got. Very close to the dome, it would start at around 6.5 C and drop rapidly down and approach C as you got further away. So it was always superluminal, still a little above C here. So this turns out, when we analyze the data, this was a 1/r decline, basically. If you add a 1/r decline to the speed of light velocity, this matched data very good, and this confirmed a prediction of subquantum kinetics that the speed of the superluminal wave should depend on the gradient of the electric potential of the shock. So because he had a dome electrode, and as you went away, it was a 1/r decrease of the potential, the gradient of his wave also decreases 1/r, and the ether wind velocity, which would be driven by the gradient of the potential, also decreased 1/r. And so it fit like a glove. So this was actually one of the 14 confirmations of subquantum kinetics was this. So this is basically what was going on, that he had an ether, he was developing an ether wind from the electrode, and the shock front was sort of surfing the ether wind. So this is a blatant disproof of special relativity. Also, here's a radiant energy apparatus that Tesla was using. He called this radiant energy. These abrupt shock fronts, DC, repeated DC shock fronts. And he would find that these would even go through walls, and he could feel it on the other side. He would report a stinging sensation when he put his hand in the beam. His were collimated in this case, and there's a patent he had. So according to subquantum kinetics, a high voltage negative potential electric discharge having a sharp rise time should induce an electrogravitic ether flux that conveys gravitationally repulsive impulse waves. So if the shocks, the electric shocks look like this, so the voltage goes way up very sharply, like 1 nanosecond or less. His were around 1 nanosecond. And then has a gradual decline because he's draining the voltage off of the dome with a resistor so he can get another shock out of it. So these were coming at like 10 times a second up to 15 times a second, repeating. So they were sort of propelling this wind in the laboratory away from the dome. And according to subquantum kinetics, a electric gradient is tied in with a gravity gradient. It's electrogravitic connection between the electric field and the gravity field. And in subquantum kinetics, you work with ether concentrations, which are scalars. They're essentially potentials, electric and gravitational potentials. And the flux, the G flux, would be like a vector. It would go down the potential gradient. So this is the basic idea. And Podkletnov also was working with these sorts of shocks. He'd have a 2 million volt shock from a Marksbank discharged through a superconducting electrode that he had a magnetic field with a coil here to confine it, and he had an anode here, and the electric shock would go across and hit the anode. So electrons in the shock would stop there, but the gravity wave component would continue, and he called this a gravity impulse beam. And he found that it would affect a pendulum at a distance. A guy and I didn't do pendulum experiments, but it's possible at higher voltage his would show similar effects, and we're going to be checking this out with experiments I'll be doing, which I'll talk about. So he clocked 64 times the speed of light for his gravity impulse beam. And this was at 2 million volt potentials. Then a 10 million volt unit was built, and he was getting over 3,000 C. He was using an atomic clock and didn't really resolve the upper limit of what that speed really was. So incredible speed, and it would put a hole through a concrete block. That was how powerful it was. Going from this to this was really a scale up in power. And he could put a dent in a 1-inch thick steel plate with this. And so it's now in a Moscow laboratory. Podkletnov is Russian. He did a lot of his work in Finland. You know the story how with his other gadget and thing with the patent office and all that, but I won't get into that.
Bad reputation.
Yeah. So anyway, it's now in a secure facility in Moscow. They consider it a weapon. It would be great for blasting asteroids out of the way to protect the Earth, or UFOs. It would make a great anti-UFO weapon, whereas missiles take time to get there, and the UFOs can laugh at them. This, is going faster than they can move, So they've got to watch out. We have these. And I don't know if you know, we're in a war now with the UFOs. I can say this, speak more at ease following Tompkins' book. William Tompkins, a very high-profile guy, a very credible guy, not like a lot of these whistleblowers you hear, like Corey Good, or I don't want to say anything negative, but they don't have the same credentials, what I'm saying, as this guy. This guy was in the secret space program, and he has all sort of backup, with papers backing up his work there and so on. And Robert Wood had helped and get this book out. How many people have read the book, or how many have heard about it? Okay, if you put William Tompkins in Google, you can at least get interviews like Project Camelot, and there's some other interviews, so you can, and then try to get the book. It's really opens your eyes that this secret space program, really, it started in 1942. We had what's called the War of LA, where we were invaded by huge UFOs, like a mothership. It reminds you of Independence Day. Had the small craft coming out of it, and we were shelling it, and the shells were just exploding. They had an energy field, and they were exploding. We weren't outside it on the energy field and weren't damaging it. Reminds you of Independence Day. And there were some people there observing it who were high-profile generals and the head of Douglas Aircraft, and they said, we got to do something about this. And that's when they started this secret program inside Douglas Aircraft Company. And the MJ-12 was born out of that, in that effort.
Can I give you a little endorsement there? Just for the audience who may not know what he's talking about, I think it was the History Channel, did a 1-hour special on what's called the Battle of Los Angeles. And it was exactly that, of re-portrayal of that exact battle. And it's probably one of the biggest UFO experiences that the United States has ever had.
Right, and I didn't know about it, and I've been studying this field so many years, and I learned about it through reading Tomskin's book. So it's not really that well known today. Anyway, in the book, just to say that that would be an excellent weapon because we're at war with a certain ET, negative ET species, or something like, I don't know, 14 or 20 of them he talks about there in the solar system. To defend ourselves, and that's what the Solar Warden Project is all about. It's an international project, has many countries like Russia's involved, China. So although we may be at odds with these countries here on Earth, up there we're all fighting the same enemy, and it's a team effort. So one thing that came out of, well, a guy told me that he had been given by Dr. Robert Shaw his notes from the 1952 Inuitak atoll hydrogen bomb test. He had been involved in measuring the effects of the shock front from the explosion. And what he had found was that it progressed at a superluminal speed away from the fireball. And this was not made public. And so the question is, who is the Pentagon protecting? Well, they protected, for example, Einstein and special relativity, which helped them cover what they were really doing, So this whole thing was an excellent cover because anti-gravity and faster than light space travel and going to the other stars is all impossible according to Einstein theory. So anyway, just letting everyone know about this now. This would have made front page news. I mean, these tests were making front page news at that time. If they also had said, by the way, this defeats special relativity, that would have been the last you would have heard of Einstein's theories. So the same thing was happening there. The fireball, you have an electron blast coming off, and it was creating an ether wind, repulsive ether wind, and the shock front was surfing that at faster than the speed of light. Now, I don't know the details of what speed they found. That's classified still. All I know is what Guy told me. And then we never found the lab book. After he passed away, it was asking his daughter and son-in-law if they come across in the laboratory this particular notebook, and they couldn't find it. So now I'm involved in a project in a European laboratory where we're building a replication of Guy's device to try to replicate the superluminal wave experiment and get good data that we can actually publish in a refereed journal, because so far all I did was publish it in my book. And also some other experiments like, I'll talk in about a minute about, we found time dilation. A clock would slow down when exposed to these blasts. Also, I had an idea that we can actually test the possibility that matter can go faster than the speed of light in these winds. If we have time, we can even do Hutchison effect type things to see if we can make things disappear. I spoke a little about the invisibility effect of the Grebennikov observed, and we saw some videos yesterday. So whether we'll get to that, we'll see how things progress. So it was a big effort to build this because Guy had passed away. His head transformer had burned out. So we couldn't use, if his device was working, I would have gone to his laboratory and done these tests, but there were some people in Hollywood who had been coming to learn how to build the thing, and they'd heard about the time dilation experiment that Guy and I had been doing, and went off on their own without letting me know what they were doing, and were trying to replicate it. Maybe, I don't know, they probably would have, if they'd found something, it would probably publish without me on the paper. And when I heard, I contacted them, went out there, and these guys were not open at all to the idea of an ether, which without the ether you can't begin to understand this. And they were also not open to subquantum kinetics, and the time dilation experiment was for testing subquantum kinetics. It was a test of a prediction. So it turned out, fortunately, they didn't go to a high enough voltage, and their rise time was really pathetic. So they wouldn't have been generating any ether wind, and it's not surprising they didn't see any effects. So anyway, there was much interaction between myself and his son-in-law and his grandson about getting details of his parts of his machine, and make photographs of different parts and email them to me, and dimensions and so on, and his schematic for the Teslatron fins and all that. So I've been contacted by this fellow who has a foundation in Europe. I won't give the name right now because we want to keep it a little under the radar until we finish the experiments, because they are, well, what's the word, breakthrough or theory overturning type, which if physicists knew, they would get angry, So, we decided to build a 500,000 volt unit instead of 200,000, go to higher voltage. And Podkletnov himself said that the interesting facts start at 500K and above. So this is sort of a schematic of Guy's device that I put together, and there were even some movies that were taken that were sent to me of the back end of his thing. And what it involves is he had a variac for varying the power supply, and he had a coil capacitor thing to generate a high frequency oscillation with, well, he had a frequency generator. I guess this, I'm not too sure if this is correct rendition of his, but anyway, he would feed a high frequency transformer with a frequency generator. In his case, his transformer was like a 25 kV, I believe, transformer. We're using a 50 kV. And his went into a Cockcroft-Walton multiplier, which went up to 200,000 volts. We're going to 500,000 volts. Then he had his Teslatron spark gap. He would put oxygen in and out to keep the ionization down. In this way, he wouldn't generate any harmful nitric oxides, which would happen if you put air through there. And that would go to his dome, and then every pulse would be discharged to ground through this resistor. And that way he'd get these repeated discharges. Here's what we're putting together in a high voltage facility. Shielded room, everything is shielded, the floor, ceiling, walls. And there's other junk in here you see in the background. This is the unit that's insulator supporting the dome, the emitter dome. And we have, in this case, a collector dome. So instead of going the field fanning out, it will be more focused, hopefully. We have to do the test to see how the field changes with distance. We put a little platform, plexiglass platform here between, so we can do experiments like these are stopwatches here in this case. The Teslatron spark gap is back here, and see more of it in this view. Here's the Cockcroft-Walton generator and the Teslatron going to the dome. This may induce a lot of inductance, but if we find it's not a sharp enough drop, we can move this closer to the dome. And we've got the transformer, high frequency transformer over here. This is something else in background here. So here's a close-up of his Teslatron that we built. And we have close to 100 fins in there. Well, it might be a little less, but anyway. When we go to, right now we're testing up to 180,000 volts because the proper transformer hasn't arrived, and we were using a World War II thing they had in the laboratory. is a lower voltage, and so when we get hopefully the new one has arrived by now, and we can start the higher voltage tests, and we'll put more fins than this in when we go to higher voltage. And this shows the transformer. Here's the old transformer we're using. And this is adjusting the power to it, the frequency input to it. So let's see, can we run this? This run as a movie somehow? I don't know. I had a movie in there to show that.
It has to be embedded in the same folder. You didn't tell me you had a video.
Yeah, I got 3 videos. That's too bad. Okay.
Huh? Are they on your flash drive?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to stop the lecture just because of that. But, so it just shows us running the thing, and
Yeah, for sure. Sounds exciting.
it's.
Where are these tests being done? New York or Maryland?
Yeah, that's being kept quiet for the time being in the name of the collaborator and the foundation and all that.
I understand.
But all that will be made public.
Okay, so we'll keep talking about what you did.
Yeah, it would be in the, you want the actual movies?
No, I'll take care of it.
Okay, I don't
keep
know if I
entertaining.
have the movies on there. I have the keynote presentation where they do play in keynote. But anyway,
Okay, so we got to look for them?
so, yeah, is this the file?
No.
Okay. So in this video, we were showing tests we were doing just to run it, to get the thing powered up. There's a lot we need to do. We didn't even have the proper oscilloscope yet when I was there. This was just earlier this month, I believe, that when I was there, the early part.
What am I looking for?
Actually, last month. Okay.
Alphabetically?
Okay, go down all the way down.
Okay, you're up here.
Okay, I'm not sure I put them on this, so.
Okay, well, if
Yeah,
you didn't.
I probably didn't put it on the stick, so,
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Okay.
It's back to
That's
you.
okay, we can still be okay.
Next time.
Yeah, next
do
time.
rehearsal.
Okay.
Okay, so you were
See,
at
I use a Mac, and that's the problem. The Mac and Microsoft still haven't figured out how to convert things properly. No. So go back to that slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So in July of 2011, we did some time dilation experiments. This started in one of the Starburst board meetings. I was saying about how subquantum kinetics predicts that high negative potential should cause watches to speed up, because sort of the opposite of a gravity well time dilation, where time slows down in a gravity well, like you talk about white dwarfs, time going slower. With a gravity hill, the electrons in subquantum kinetics produce the opposite, gravity hills, to have a gravity well, and we should observe an acceleration possibly, and wanted to test that. So I had bought some scientific stopwatches, 3 of them. We were going to use one as a control and the other 2 put near his dome, or in his laboratory down there. And I had basically sent them to him because I couldn't be there at the time. And he did these tests with the watches. Here's showing hanging there. And here's sort of diagram of the way it was set up. So here's his dome, and here's a watch placed near it. And I later learned, I had to go to Greece, and I spent some time in Greece, so I couldn't be there. And he told me about the results that he found. They got various results, a range of results, but the most astounding one was a loss of time, not an acceleration, but a loss of time of 4 minutes, 59 seconds out of 60 minutes. In other words, an 8.3% slowing of time, which and I came up with this theory, maybe it's not due to the potential, but due to the ether wind itself, because for the watch, it doesn't know the difference between as if it's going 0.4 times the speed of light relative to stationary ether, or if it's in laboratory, stationary ether is going by it. So this was a suggested explanation for why we're getting this. And this was a major incentive to do this project, in the European project, to duplicate his device. After I got back, by then his unit, his transformer had blown out. And for years he didn't have, until he passed away, didn't have an operating unit, unfortunately. So a lot of Murphy's Law type of stuff. So the Subquantum Kinetics, this is the first publication in 1985 as a special issue in the International Journal of General Systems. I had submitted 3 papers, and they decided to publish all of them since they were very interactive, so they made a special issue for it. And later I put it in the form of a book, Subquantum Kinetics, which has now gone through 4 editions, and the 4th is an e-book. And if you buy the 3rd paperback edition, you get the e-book free if you give your email address to send you the link. So subquantum kinetics predicts, well, the various relativistic effects fall out of subquantum kinetics without introducing ad hoc postulates, like Einstein's postulates were ad hoc, added on to other things. With subquantum kinetics, we start with just a set of reaction diffusion equations, and that's it. And for example, time dilation, if the ether, it's a reaction diffusion system where think in terms of chemistry, we have chemicals reacting. If now your chemical medium is moving fast, there's less residence time for the things to interact, and so everything slows down. And I'll show you a slide later. There's a cycle effect in the model G, which generates particles and wave behavior. I've only 15. Okay, so I'll skip here. Preliminary test we ran investigating the time dilation. This is me clicking the watches simultaneously, and my assistant here takes one, puts it at one place, I take the other one, and I take the third one, the control, put it 10 meters away. And in these tests, it was preliminary. We didn't find anything above the noise of the watches. So this was at 180,000 volts, and we still don't know what gradient we have because we have to measure that. So this was very preliminary. These tests will be continued. Now, this is a Douglas Aircraft Corporation document that was disclosed years ago. It was dated 1968, and in there you see this kinetic particle theory, which is an ether theory. This is what they had back in '68, and I read this theory and I said, my God, subquantum kinetics beats the heck out of this theory. You know, it's basically a mechanical ether theory. So my interest is now, after this has been disclosed, the solar warden effect, it's a real war we've got going on. If they don't have a decent ether theory to develop etheric craft, because the real fancy stuff, you need to know about the ether and how to engineer it. And so I want to work with these people and help them out. Maybe they already know about subquantum kinetics, but I don't know. Air Force Space Command did show interest in my theory, and invited me there to Colorado Springs. I had lunch with the director of science of the Space Command and gave him a little presentation. And they're interested in taking stuff out of the black, sort of reverse engineering stuff from the black world that they're not able to release and sort of recreate it in the white world so it's more open. And all this is in the spirit of the new disclosure atmosphere, because they had told me things have changed from higher up. And of course now Trump has created the US Space Force, which will probably legitimize a lot of this war going on. You know. So we'll see where that leads. In Tompkins' book, he talks about him designing, he was a designer, and he was being asked to design spacecraft between 1 and 3 kilometers long. He was saying that these were constructed in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah and then lofted into space. And I believe that the way they lofted was with Project Skyvault technology, which is described in my book. If those of you who have read it, it describes this in detail. Through somebody who disclosed to me some of letters he had, and I sort of reverse engineered the whole project. Research began in the late 40s, was carried out by Rocketdyne Corporation in the LA area, and it lofted crafts on microwave energy beams. This is probably what Tompkins refers to as electromagnetic propulsion technologies. He doesn't go into detail, and he also refers to anti-gravity technologies, but he never goes into detail about these technologies. That's still secret as far as this disclosure is concerned. It used, excuse me, it used masers and phase conjugate resonators to create the beams. It also used sawtooth-shaped microwave waveforms, like what Obalansky and I were using. It used metamaterials with negative refractive indexes to increase the thrust. So this is kind of a sketch of how these beams would loft a craft. These would be beam generators, and maybe the metamaterial would be located in the middle, which would phase conjugate the beams back to their sources. And these would contain the energy in the beams. So bottles are like energy bottles. And that's the beauty of them. They can power them up and they can go to very high energies. It was also the technology that brought down the World Trade Center, unfortunately. This is photos from a 1996 CBS spy thriller called Smith & Smith. I don't know if any of you caught this. And it's basically this same idea was disclosed in there. And this ended up being the last episode of this series, mysteriously. It was taken off the air after that. Also, this is an artist's conception of a vehicle launch gantry the Texas engineering firm was asked to bid on, as related by my informant, who I call Tom. And it's in my book in chapter 7. Not this Tom. So he figured it must be to launch these type of things, the description. And I believe these Delta-type aircraft were using this technology. These are really microwave beams that are ionizing the atmosphere right near the source. They actually create beams that go down to the Earth. Here's another one from Belgium. You had Belgian sightings, and Bruce probably had seen similar things. He talked about yesterday. This is a beam generator. We don't have time to go into too much detail. Use a gun diode, and microwave beam is focused out. It comes into a piece of barium titanate crystal. Part of the beam is reflected into the crystal, creates a hologram it has all the information of the incoming beam, and the hologram is then pumped with the reflected pump beam and creates an outgoing time reverse beam, phase conjugated beam, which goes exactly back to the source. So the energy stays bottled up, and by adjusting the waveform, you can get thrusts, both here and here, so it can loft things. And this is a standard mirror. And this is a phase conjugate mirror where everything is bottled up. These are described in my book. And sort of like Star Trek technology, the phaser beam idea. So in his book, Tompkins talks about naval spacecraft carriers. Configuration T was 1.5 kilometers long, configuration J 1 kilometer long. And they used electromagnetic propulsion. Discussed the following ships for space battle group: 1 kilometer space destroyers, 2 kilometers long space landing assault ships, 2 kilometer long space logistics support ships, 2 kilometer space personnel transports. He also mentioned Einstein's invisibility ship systems, probably referring to the Philadelphia experiment type stuff. And even had 20 kilometer ships they were using for transport of people to other planets. That they were 17 kilometers. But the construction in Utah could handle up to 20 kilometer ships, he was saying. He also designed a 3.2 kilometer interplanetary mineral transport vehicle. So there's a whole industry going out, so like the breakaway economy you hear about. So they were constructed massive underground facilities, he was saying, and then they would somehow get them into space. I had a dream in the 80s, and what I saw was the thing looked like an aircraft carrier in some hangar, underground hangar, and suddenly these beams were coming down and lifting the thing. This was a dream in color, which I normally don't have. And I figure I must have been remote viewing this stuff. Because it all makes sense now after reading Tompkins' book. And this is sort of like what I was seeing. If you can imagine the longest aircraft carrier would be like 300 meters long. Here we're dealing with 1 kilometer to 3 kilometers. So they may have broken these things up in segments and hoisted them with detached separate beams, and then assembled them in space, welded them together in space. So this would be a very efficient way to get this stuff off the planet. Here's another ship. I think McKinnon deserves a little credit, so we should name a ship after him. You know who McKinnon is, the computer hacker who hacked the Space Command site. And he found all. That was the first forewarning about the Solar Warden project, that there were these ship-to-ship transfers, and we had sort of Enterprise-like spaceships out there with crews, huge crews on them. So also in reading Tompkins' books, you see that they were aware of Townsend Brown's work in the 1950s. And of course, Townsend Brown developed electrogravitics, but he didn't have a good theory. But
you explained it with your GL and the G.
Yeah, in subquantum kinetics, the electrons produce gravity hills and protons gravity wells. But the proton gravity well is slightly deeper than electron gravity hill, which is why neutral matter has a net gravity attraction, gravitational attraction. But if you can separate them, when they're unmasked, this is a huge force you can develop. And he had massive capacitors, so the dielectric had mass. He put lead or something like that here and create the thrust towards a positive electron. And here were some of his rotors.
I would give you another endorsement. You're probably the only theorist who's actually explained why this force is going toward the positive. Because everyone else just guesses.
Yeah.
The Townsend Brown effect.
Yeah. And here's a document which I got I found it was missing from the stacks in Library of Congress. It was in the card catalog. It was the only thing on electrogravitics at that time, back in '85. So they did a search, and they said, that's strange, it's a very rare document. The only place we find it is at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So I said, what the heck? And I did an interlibrary loan. I was, at the time, in Alexandria, Virginia, so they probably figured some government senator or something wanted it, and they sent it. And so I took and photocopied, made 10, 15 copies. And then Tom wanted this to get out. I had given it to a few friends. And he said, we got to get this published. So it became a centerpiece of his electrogravitic systems book. Took this and my paper on the B-2 bomber, reverse engineering the B-2 bomber, and that was his first edition, which now is in my book, Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion.
But this document is actually in our book.
Yes, and it's in Tom's book, both in Tom's.
Outside the door at our desk.
Yeah, and in Secret's book, in the appendix. And this really was an eye-opener. It showed all these aircraft industry, companies that were involved in electrolytics at that time, in the 50s. And also, Townsend Brown had Project Winter Haven, which you've heard of, in '53, which he submitted to the Navy. And the Navy's behind this whole project with Solar Warden. And so they were aware of his stuff. He was trying to develop Mach 2.4 disks. So I just want to talk about this. This explains how, I spoke briefly about this yesterday, how you can have abrupt changes of acceleration with UFOs and without inertia. And here it's monopolar on the outside. It's all negative charge. And your positive is in the middle, and it's floating potential. And you can put something like these shock front things to jack the potential onto the outer hull, and it'll keep jacking this potential up because it's floating. So you can go to very high potentials. Also, you're ionizing the atmosphere here, so you get phase conjugation because it becomes nonlinear. So you're conserving the energy, the pulses. Also, the ether itself can jack to very high potentials. Tesla was observing this with his similar transmitters. So you can develop potentials even higher than the electron potentials, and the word for that is virtual charge. So very negative virtual charge. So this is very gravitational repulsive. So it's like a shield here. It's almost like a Faraday cage repelling. And now if suddenly you eliminate a lot of the charge here or reduce the potential and keep this up, this suddenly will accelerate upwards. And the occupant will not feel any force, inertial force, because he's being pulled to the positive here all the time. As far as he's concerned, he has this force to the positive. Also, this deflects the etherons coming down due to cause the gravity field. We have a geon flux that comes down into the Earth. So this would deflect around the craft. And this is an overview of subquantum kinetics, which I don't have time to go into. Physics today. This is what trash that needs to be emptying. You can take a brief look at that. It's most of modern physics. It's replaced very elegantly in subquantum kinetics. So this is the current approach of physicists. That's why they only do certain experiments, develop theories, but the theories are disconnected because they're looking at different aspects of the whole, and they sew them together. They call that a unified field theory, but it's really
not very well unified.
Yeah, ends up a patchwork quilt. Now with subquantum kinetics, we start with the sort of the genome of the elephant, and we grow the elephant. And that way it's unified. And if we don't get an elephant that matches reality, we modify, we tweak the genome. So it's a totally different approach. It's a modeling approach instead of an experimental observation approach. But observation does come in, but it's secondary. It's to check the results. It's based on the idea of flux. It's an old idea that Heraclitus first suggested. It's also in the ancient Chinese and Indian concepts of the ether. And this is the view that you have an ether flux creating our universe is made out of these ether states, G, X, and Y. G is the gravitational, X and Y makes the electric field. Magnetic is due to the motion of the electric field. So you have outside to our universe, upstream and downstream, and time comes from the flux flowing through us, which we're stationary in this flux here. I call this a transmutational dimension. And here, if you put all the reactions together, there's 5 kinetic equations, and they map them out. It looks like this. It's model G. It's like 2 crossing reaction pathways that have a loop reaction. And here it's in motion. At least this is a movie that works. And I don't think this will work. because this was a movie too. It shows the particle emerging. This was a modeling done of Model G in 2009, and exactly verifies all the predictions I was just doing in my head and mapping it out, and the simulations actually verified everything. This is another one. Oh, this movie is actually working. Here shows the matter emerging. And it shows that with subquantum kinetics, existing matter nucleates new matter in its vicinity. So in subquantum kinetics, particles nucleate from particles, zero-point energy fluctuations. But that's very rare. Once you form matter, it becomes very common for a particle to duplicate. So it's like matter produces more matter. It's an exponential process. And this shows the wave form of the particle, his proton, the electron. G field is negative for the proton, positive for the electron. This Turing wave was later, I call it Turing wave, was later observed in particle scattering experiments, as well as this bias of the field in the proton versus the neutron. So all these things confirm subquantum kinetics, and they're among the verifications. I will skip the Kowalski-Frost experiment, but subquantum kinetics explains that too, because he's basically pumping electrons into a quartz crystal, causing it to expand, and electrons are anti-gravitic, so that's why he was able to lift something like 55-pound weight with his crystal. Getting back to this, I just want to say an alternative version of this, because here the occupant would be exposed to extreme electric forces. So what you really want to do is put the positive in the shell, so you have a double shell, and you charge it negative on the outside, positive on the inside. This shows how the field would be. It would be very negative here. It would be constant, so you wouldn't feel any forces here. And then very negative here. You want, if you were going to go up, you'd want to make this more negative to this. And this is the Navy patent. And they don't tell you a lot of things. So you're all familiar with the Pius Navy patent. It's the first UFO patent that the Navy has released. They do say that they charge the outer shell, but they don't say they use high voltage. They just say you have a power supply. And I believe this is like millions of volts. And they just say this is grounded here. So they don't say this is minus and this is plus, but you have to reverse engineer this type of stuff. They have these, it's a high-frequency gravity wave generator, they call it. They have these sound generators and gas-filled cavities that are resonant, and I believe they probably have barium titanate here. They spin these in opposite directions, and this whole thing is probably very small in reality. They just made it large for the patent, so we have to cut it. This is the last slide. And so this is basically producing gravitational pulses here, which we get, you can do it in other ways, like in the previous version. By the way, the other version I showed you, I developed in '85, I just hadn't published it. That's the first time I'm showing it to anybody. So, that's it.